Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday webinars. Today's session is all about unlocking ELPI, English Learner Progress Indicator, what it is, how it's calculated, and most importantly, how you can use it to drive instruction. If you're joining us live, feel free to share your name and what school you're from. But before we jump in, just a few quick housekeeping notes. Go to the next slide, Jim.
I have it on the next slide on my computer.
Okay, cool. So my name is Shay. I'm the host, community manager at Parsec. Today's session is being recorded. You will receive a recording and slides by email after the webinar. And then, like I mentioned before, please use the chat to just share who you are, your thoughts, any questions, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. So we love to make this interactive, so don't be shy in the chat. And then as a reminder, last week's webinar, Summer and I broke down what a data gloat means when you're talking about our products. Next week, we'll have Brandon Leak, who is the winner of America's Got Talent in 2020, and also the MC for our host, our summit in February. So he'll be talking about what it takes to build a culture where creativity feels safe, and he'll unpack some rules that support creativity in the classroom and what some roadblocks may be. And with that, I am super excited to introduce today's speaker. We have Jim Scheible. Jim has worked in and alongside California charter schools since 2006. After starting his career in New York City, he spent a decade serving on the California Charter Schools Association's member council, and he now supports charter schools across the state as they go through their renewal process. As we were talking a little bit earlier before you guys hopped on, Jim is a self-confessed data nerd, and which is why we brought him into our Parsec circle. And so he's really focused on one goal, making sure that students have access to high quality public schools. So we're excited to have him on our webinar today. He'll be breaking down LP in a way that's really clear and actionable. And so with that, Jim, I'm handing off the mic to you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We're going to jump right in. We do have a block set aside before we get to the end for Q&A. And like it was mentioned, please put your questions in the chat, but you also have a chance to unmute and ask your questions live if you would like. So I always want to start with our outcomes. As a former teacher, I think, having objectives or having, goals is really good because it helps you backwards map to where you want to get to. So these are the things we want you to walk away with from today. Obviously, this is being recorded and you'll have access to the slide deck so you can come back and reference these materials when you need to. But outcome number one, just define ELPI or LP, depending on how you say it. Just define what it is, how it's calculated. We want to be able to empower you to calculate the ELPI in the summer, and we'll talk about why that's beneficial as opposed to waiting for the dashboard to come out in the fall, and how you can use your ELPI analysis to drive instruction. And then after the questions, but before we leave, we will go over how to find the data needed to calculate your LP or ELPI via TOMS, via the spreadsheet you can download. That's kind of an extra thing for the folks who are responsible for that or who may be accessing the spreadsheet over the summer when you get to that. So here's our agenda. Kind of runs through the objectives that we just saw or the outcomes that we just saw. Again, we're doing the attendee questions before we get to the end and that bonus section on how to get into the spreadsheet and find your data from TOMS. So let's dive in. So ELPI, what is it? ELPI stands for English Learner Progress Indicator. And this is an academic indicator on the dashboard, so it's subject to the 95% participation threshold. The academic indicators are ELA, math, ELPI, and then CCI. For charter schools, they're particularly important because they're used in the renewal criteria. They're also important for all schools, but in terms of charter renewal, which I work with a lot of schools, it's doubly important for that purpose. And what ELPI does is it displays the percentage of English learners in first through 12th grade who make progress using two consecutive summative LPAC scores. So it's first through 12th grade because a kindergartner would not have two summative LPAC, would not have two consecutive summative LPAC scores. TK students are no longer taking the LPAC, and you have to have those two scores to be able to be part of this process. You could have the alternate LPAC or the summative LPAC. So this is essentially just bullet point that just showed up is telling you who is eligible to be in the denominator for the ELPI calculation. And then I do want to add that starting 2024, with that dashboard, long-term English learners or LTELs were included in ELPI calculations as a separate student group. That is the only student group within the ELPI because ELPI is for English learners who are themselves a student group. And you can see here how the state has looked ever since the ELPI came about, starting in 2019, which was the very first year, and then all the way through. From 2024 to 2025 was actually the first year that we saw the state make progress or increase their score over 2 consecutive years. And then how is ELPI calculated? And I think for the record as well, I'm going rather fast because we only have 30 minutes and this is a rather technical presentation. But again, you can go back and look at the slides. You can listen to the recording as needed, and we're going to get to all of your questions. But how do you actually calculate ELPI? And this is important to know. One, like how did your dashboard metric come about? But also, if you want to do this yourself in the summer, how does it work? So again, this looks at the change in an English learner's summative LPAC score over 2 consecutive years. If a student makes enough growth to move an ELPI level, then they count as making progress. Another way you can make progress is you can just earn a level 4 both years. Obviously, if you're at level 4 in LPAC, there's not a level above that to progress to. So you get credit for students who maintain level 4. Those are also students who are probably likely in the reclassification bucket, so they may not be ELs for very much longer. Okay, so one thing to clarify with folks is that the LPAC assessment gives you 4 levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, but ELPI has 6 levels. Why CDE or whoever decided to make them different, that's a different question, not for this webinar, but this is just how it works. So you can see here on the top row the LPAC levels, and then you can see in the bottom row the ELPI levels. So they've taken level 2 from LPAC and level 3 from LPAC and split them into low and high. And the way it works is to make progress, a student must move up at least one ELPI level or remain at level 4. So you can actually go from too low to too high, and you will have made progress on ELPI, even though your LPAC level would have stayed at a level 2. So let's look at an example real quick. Let's say a student places as too low on the 24-25 summative LPAC. Their LPAC report would say they're a level 2. But we would know, based on their scale score, which we'll talk about in a second, we would know based on the scale score that they're actually a too low. On the 25-26 summative LPAC, they would need to score too high or higher to be counted as making progress for ELPI. So that's essentially what ELPI is measuring. Like, did a student make progress on their ELPI level from one LPAC to the next? And this is the ELPI formula. So you have the number of ELs on top, you have the number of ELs who made progress, and on the bottom, you have the number of ELs with 2 consecutive summative LPAC scores or summative alternate LPAC. Again, it has to be the same exam 2 years in a row. So summative LPAC 2 years in a row or summative alternate LPAC 2 years in a row to be counted. We said earlier this is subject to the 95% participation rule. So let's say that you did not have 95% of your ELs test. You essentially would get students added to the denominator, but no students added to the numerator to have a penalty essentially of students not making progress until you got to the 95% threshold. So if you're off by 1 in terms of getting to the 95% threshold, you would have 1 student added to the denominator, but not added to the numerator. So it would affect your percentage by pulling it down. That's the participation rate penalty. This is all available in the dashboard technical guide for ELPI. I've tried to summarize it here, but you can also read that document if you would like. Okay, so how is ELPI calculated? Maybe a little bit more of a visual example. This table you can see breaks down the scale score range by grade level for each of those 6 ELPI levels. So to make progress, you must go up 1 ELPI level from the current year to the compared to the previous year. So you've got to make progress by kind of going diagonally on this chart, or you can stay at level 4. It's important to note that as you go up in grades, the scale score ranges change. So your growth is not compared to a first grade to first grade scale score range. It's first grade scale score range to second grade scale score range. So it's important to take that into account when you're doing this calculation. We can look at a couple of examples. So here's a quick example. The yellow highlight is where the student was in second grade. So in 24-25, a second grader earns a scale score between 1447 and 1470. So that's the yellow highlight. Their ELPI level is too high. Again, the LPAC report will say level two. And then for the student to make progress in 25-26, which is the current year we're in, they need to score an ELPI level three. It could be three low, three high, or level four, which are those blue highlights. You can see they need to go up, from a 1470 to a 1488 at minimum would be their scale score target to increase. Another example here, this is looking at a student who was in fifth grade in 24-25, and they scored a too low. They were in that scale score range. So in the current year, 25-26, they could score any of those blue highlights, too high, three low, three high, or level four. So that's essentially how ELPI works. For the Parsec team, we have a quick check for understanding here. So I don't know if folks are going to be able to unmute and just share their response, or they want to put it in the chat. But let's say that a sixth grader, this is for all of you to do your own internal calculation. You don't know the question yet, but let's just say a sixth grader earned a scale score of 1500 on last year's Summit of LPAC, the 24-25 LPAC. So again, sixth grade, scale score of 1500. So the three questions are, what was their ELPI level last year with that 1500 in sixth grade? What ELPI level or levels do they need to achieve in the current year to show progress? And what's the minimum scale score point growth they need to progress one ELPI level this year? Remember, they have a 1500 in sixth grade. So in seventh grade, what ELPI levels do they need to reach to be able to show progress? As well as what's the minimum scale score point growth they need to progress one ELPI level this year? And from the Parsec team, I don't know if we have anyone who's not a Parsec team member, but maybe there's someone brave enough who's in the audience who would unmute themselves and be able to walk us through the answers to these questions on our check for understanding.
Eric, I saw you put in answers in the chat. Do you mind just
Oh.
saying it out loud?
Looks like for sixth grade, a 1500 would put them in too high. And then in order to make progress in seventh grade, they would need a 1527 to be in three low. And then to be in three high, they would need a 1551.
Awesome. Yeah. So no matter what, to make progress, this student needs to make 27 points of gain of growth on their scale score. I gave 1500 as kind of an easy one. It's easy to do the math from that, but that's awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, and they could get a level four. That would still count as making growth, right? So depending on their scale score growth, if they at least got 27 points of scale score growth, they would be making progress. Anything above that would also be progress, and we'd celebrate and appreciate that too. But that's essentially how the ELPI is set up to work. All
Jim, we
right,
also
so
had one question.
great.
So Karen asked, in a 6th to 8th middle school with no 5 grade or below data, which middle school years count for LP?
So it does not matter the grade span of your school. If you have students in sixth grade who show up with a prior year summit of LPAC, and they are going to take the summit of LPAC with you in sixth grade because they have not been reclassified, they are going to count in your ELPI. So the eligibility criteria is like, do they have a summit of LPAC from the prior year, regardless of where they went? And I think the other thing to point out is like, no matter when a student shows up at your school, from what I've read, if they take the LPAC with you and they have a prior year summit of LPAC, like they will be on your dashboard. It's not the same continuous enrollment rules that they have for DFS with ELA and MathCasp. But hopefully that answers the question. But we have time for Q&A as well if there's a follow-up on that. So let's talk about determining ELPI in the summer. There's a way to do this with the spreadsheet that you get from Tom's once all of your LPAC scores are in. And I want to emphasize, like you can do this for all the dashboard indicators, but we're only talking about ELPI today. I don't think you want to wait until the dashboard is released to estimate your ELPI or any of the other ones, because there's a couple reasons for that I've put here, not just related to charter renewal, but overall for instruction. And again, like I said, once the LPAC scores are in Tom's and you have all your test results back, you can determine your ELPI. These are the reasons I think it makes sense to calculate this as soon as possible. And again, I want to emphasize like you could do this for all the dashboard indicators. Um, if you're doing this in June or July over the summer, you can see right away what did and did not work the prior year to support your English learners. You can use the data in the summer to plan for the upcoming school year, including your summer PD and day one interventions with students. If you wait for the dashboard, that's in October now, starting in 2026. It was in November in 2025. You're already way into the school year and you don't have days, in the middle of the fall to stop and pivot once the dashboard comes out. So let's use the data once you get it and you can use it right away. You can make decisions regarding effective curriculum resources and interventions right away. Again, don't wait for that dashboard to come out in the fall. Do this work in the summer and you can pivot faster and make better decisions with that data for kids. You can also set growth targets by student for the upcoming year to ensure progress is made. We just saw the student in the previous example, like their growth target would have been a minimum increase of 27. 1500 to 1527 would have shown that they would have made progress. Last but not least, for the charter schools who are on here, you can predict how ELPI will impact your school's performance category placement regarding charter renewal. For the most part, as long as you have one yellow indicator on the dashboard, if your ELPI is above the state average, you will be a middle performing school no matter what. Okay, so I just want us to think about this. I guess I've been talking fast because I look at the time. We got a lot of time, which is great. But think about this, and you can respond in the chat if you want. How would the choices in the above bullet points change if you waited until October for the dashboard to be released? So I've made the pitch, do this in the summer. Some people will not do it in the summer, or maybe will not have the capacity to do it in the summer. But if you got the results in October, how would the above bullet points be affected or be different based on that timing? And again, I'm going to pause. We're just going to have some quiet time and we'll come back in about 1 minute. But if you have a response you want to share in the chat, that's great. Okay, so hopefully you've thought about, you know, getting this data in the summer versus getting this data in October, November, and how it can make a difference for your school and why this would be an effective strategy instructionally and for students and for also making decisions about professional development or curriculum or other instructional resources. So moving on, this is essentially getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of how you would do this work. But all of the data is in the spreadsheet that you would download from Tom's. We get into the specifics of the spreadsheet, like what it's named and which columns to look at in the bonus section after the Q&A. I wanted to save that for the folks who would be getting their hands dirty in the Excel spreadsheet and not spend time on the whole group with that. But again, if you want to hear about that, stay on until 10:30. And this is what you need from Tom's. So you need the current year summative LPAC scale score and grade level because we saw there's a different scale score band for every grade level. You need the prior year summative LPAC scale score and grade level. That is also in the Tom spreadsheet. I mean, the grade level is pretty easy to figure out for the prior year, current year -1. But if you scroll to the right, you will find data for actually not only the prior year, but like the prior 3 or 4 years, depending on how long the student's been taking the LPAC. And you're going to use the current year summative LPAC scale score to determine the current year ELPI level. So you're going to do a little bit of translation of like, what ELPI level does that scale score translate to? Kind of like we did with the example with the 6th grader with the 1500 scale score translated to a 2 low. And then you're going to use the prior year summative LPAC score to determine the prior year ELPI level. And you're going to compare the two, current year and prior year. And if the ELPI level increased or stayed at level 4, then the student made progress. And all students who made progress are placed in the numerator. All the students with the 2 consecutive summative scores are in the denominator. When you're doing this in the summer, you need to figure out internally, like, how is your participation rate looking? And are you potentially going to get a penalty? And maybe you would just self-assess a penalty. It's hard to do that with the TOM spreadsheet because it only shows you the kids who took the test in the current year for the most part. And then you just divide, convert it to a percentage, and round to the nearest tenth of a percent, and you've got your estimated ELPI. If you do all these calculations right, you're usually within 1 to 1/2 of a percentage point of what comes out on the dashboard. For some reason, there's a slight variation in the dashboard sometimes, but you should be extremely close to what you're going to get on the dashboard. Plus, you have all the data at the individual kid level, which is really helpful for instruction. So I did do a quick example here. So let's take a student who's currently in fourth grade. But I mean, they just finished fourth grade. So I guess right now they would be in fifth grade, but in 24-25, they were in fourth grade. And we got their summative LPAC score as a 1521, which translates to an ELPI level of 3 low. We looked at the prior year when they were in third grade. Their summative LPAC scale score was a 1482. That was a ELPI level of 2 high. So I compared the current year and the prior year, a 3 low in fourth grade versus a 2 high in third grade. And I asked myself, did the student make progress? And the answer is yes. A 3 low is a higher ELPI level than a 2 high. And so you can see here graphically, the student moved from the two high box in third grade to the 3 low box in fourth grade, and they have made progress. Now, you don't have to do this level of detail for each student. You can just throw it on a spreadsheet and do some math, but this is kind of breaking down how you do the calculation for each individual student. And then a school-wide example would be, we take all students who made progress are placed in the numerator. Let's just make up that 56 students made progress. The students with 2 consecutive summative scores are in the denominator. Let's just make up that 79 total ELs had 2 consecutive summative scores. We divide, convert to a percentage, and round to the nearest tenth of a percent. So we get 70.9%. There's our estimated ELPI. I think most schools would be happy with a 70.9% ELPI. That would be very high on the dashboard in terms of the color scheme and if you showed progress from the prior year as well. But this is great. And so hopefully, we're getting closer to numbers like this, and knowing all that you know now, especially like how to set targets for individual kids, can help you support students to make progress year over year, whether a level 1 going to a level 2 or a level 3 high going to a level 4. The one last thing I wanted to talk about was using the ELPI analysis to drive instruction. Then we want to get to some questions. So we talked about why it makes sense to calculate ELPI ASAP. I don't need to talk about these bullet points because we've seen them. The other thing that the TOM spreadsheet will provide to you, this is on the student score report, but it's a little bit easier on a spreadsheet because you have everybody in one place, is student performance by domain. For the LPAC, there's 4 domains, reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And you will get the student data, student scores for each of those domains on this spreadsheet as well. And this is an example of a student and of a student's score by domain. And if you use this student performance by domain, it can really also aid in targeting interventions for that individual student. And again, you've got all of this on a spreadsheet, so you can see trends across your grade levels or across your school or across a classroom if you want to break down the data like this. But this sample student, right? I'm not sure what their overall scale score was. I don't even know what grade they were in, but I can see for sure on the LPAC when they broke it down, listening was a big area of growth for this individual student. These scores are on a scale of 3. We know the LPAC has a scale of 4. These domains have a scale of 3. Why those don't match up, again, not a question we're going to answer on this webinar, and I don't know the answer, but still, we know that 1 is really standing out for listening for this student. So that's another way that you can use the LPAC data in the summer and the TOM spreadsheet to say, like, not only do I know which students did or did not make progress, but I also know which domains within the LPAC or within ELD I want to focus on by individual student, groups of students, grade levels, or whatever. And I can see what was working in prior years. So I think that's also really helpful data to pull. So with that being said, this is a great time to ask some questions. These are only 30 minutes, so we went over this really quickly. But happy to stop and answer questions. And then also we have a little bit of a closeout slide with how to get this data from the actual spreadsheet. So I will look at the chat, but folks can come off of mute and ask a question out loud as well, if you would like. Either it was a really good presentation because there's no questions, or
We
um,
got a question, Jim.
oh, okay, it wasn't that good.
Um,
Are the ELPI scale scores set, or do they change every year? That spreadsheet that I showed, that chart that had all the grade levels on the left and the scale scores, is from the dashboard technical guide, and it has not changed. Um, it has definitely not changed in the post-COVID time. Could it change? Theoretically, it could, but I would be using that table of scale scores until you hear otherwise. And I believe changing it would be a public process to change the cut scores. I believe. I don't know if that's a CDE or a state board discussion, but it would definitely be a public process. But it hasn't changed in several years. So the thought is, unless you hear it's changing, go with what you see. Go with the current setup. I assume that exists for high school grade levels as well. It does. So that chart I showed, there is a row for ninth and 10th. So ninth and 10th have the same scale score bands. And then there is a row for 11th and 12th. 11th and 12th also have the same scale score bands. But I just didn't put it on this slide deck because the school, I took this from a school presentation that was for a K-8 school. But that whole chart, again, is in the dashboard technical guide for ELPI. You could also email me and I can give it to you. Okay, it's 10:26. I don't hear any other burning questions or see them in the chat. Let's go over the last part real quick, and then we're going to turn it back over to the Parsec team. So this is the bonus round, finding your ELPI data using TOMS. So we mentioned that you can download a spreadsheet from TOMS. What you need to do is log into the area where reports are available to download and download the report that starts with all of these words. The name is longer, but the name was like more than one line on a PowerPoint slide, so I didn't want to type out the whole thing. But there's only one report that starts with all of these words, so please go and find this report, and this is the one that you would download. And then to calculate the ELPI, these are the columns you need to get the data from. Again, there are a lot of columns on this spreadsheet. I don't know if it's 1,000, but it's a lot. So we're just trying to filter here which ones are important for this calculation. Column Q has the grade assessed. That would be the most recent grade the student was in. Column EJ has the overall scale score. Column KX has the grade assessed -1. So EJ is the overall scale score for like the most recent LPAC, and then you start getting into assessed the -1, which would be the prior year. It doesn't say prior year on it, it says -1. It actually, if you keep going to the right, it'll say -2 and then -3. But we're interested in the prior year scores, which are in these two columns, KX and LD. And then if you want the domain data, there's a typo there, didn't catch that. But the domain data for the most recent LPAC is in the following columns: ES, ET, EU, and EV. And you'll find listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and those are those performance levels of 1, 2, or 3. The last thing I'll say here is like, as you do this, you can also, there's a column pretty close to EJ that says like overall performance level. Obviously, if a student got a 1 or a 4, there's no math to do because the LPAC level of 1 is the same as the ELPI level of 1, and same thing for level 4. It's really just the 2s and 3s you have to sort and figure out like, are they 2 high or 2 low, or are they 3 high or 3 low? So you could also get the overall performance level column in there, and that would just, easily say, okay, 1s are 1s, 4s are 4s, and let me just focus on the 2s and 3s. So that's it for me. Turn it back over to the Parsec team. If you want to email me, you can. Here's my email. And then there's this exciting event coming up, which I'm not going to talk about.
Well, thank you, Jim, for sharing all these learning and insights. Kim is going to put, for all you guys who may have questions, she'll put again Jim's email in the chat, and then when we send the recording with the video and the slides, it'll also be his contact in the email. But thank you all for joining us. Just as a heads up, if you guys are attending CCSA, we are having a sip and social. And so come on through, meet the team, have some really good drinks and food. Kim will put the registration link in the chat for you all if you will be there. Would love to have you. And then go on to the next slide, Jim. As a reminder, we have next week is going to be Brandon Leak, who is our MC for the summit. He'll be talking about how you can use poetry to increase and build confidence in our students. And then with that, thank you all for spending, the early morning with us. We know that you guys are busy with school, so we appreciate you choosing to spend time with us. We'll stick around for any questions if you have any, but if not, have a great Wednesday and have a great week, and we'll see you all next Wednesday at 10 a.m.